Looking at the schedule, the Air Force Falcons start the season at home, then fly to Navy in week 2. Then it's Mountain West Conference play 5 of the next 6 weeks. The Commanders Classic versus Army in Texas to start November, followed by 3 more Mountain West contests to round out the season. You can find all of the team schedules plus a whole lot more on our website at BehindTheLinesTV.com. And now it's time to talk about the 2021 Air Force Falcons. And here to help me unpack the coming season is senior sports writer for the Gazette, Brent Brigham. Brent, it's great to have you back on the show. Let's just talk generically first. What's your take on the 2021 Air Force Falcons?
There's a lot of reason to be really interested in this team. I think the defense in particular is going to be a unique season just because they had all the turnbacks and most of those came on the defensive side. So basically the entire starting defense that they had pegged for 2020 took the semester off. All those guys are now back and they mix in with the guys who did start in 2020 and had a lot of success. They pitched a shutout against New Mexico and really throughout most of the season, they held their own. So now you have those experienced guys from 2020 with a whole slew of guys who were supposed to be the guys in 2020, and they're all going to be fighting for those same spots. So defensively, there's a ton of depth and a lot of talent. So we don't know a lot about the offense yet, but we know the defense is going to be loaded.
You know, on the offensive side, the only 3 players we really know about and we've heard about so far are starter Brad Roberts, Zeke Daniels, and Kyle Patterson.
And to that list, I'll add Brandon Lewis, who was a slot receiver. He played a lot last year. And then David Cormier has been in the program for 5 years. So he's a known commodity within Air Force, even though he hasn't played. So there's a lot of returning talent on offense, even though from an experience standpoint, it may not jump out on paper.
Is there anybody else on their roster that you've got your eye on, or anybody else that you think we should be watching this season?
Well, I mean, defensively, they've got some legitimate, all Mountain West type candidates. And DeMonte Meeks, a linebacker, Trey Bugg, defensive back, Jordan Jackson up front, Lakota Wills at outside backer. Those guys have been around, but again, none of them were around last year. They all took the turn back. So it'll be interesting to see with a year off and, 1 more year of maturity, just how good they can be, because they're some of the more talented defensive players Air Force has had, certainly in my 10 years on this beat. So they're going to be guys I like to watch. But offensively, huge question marks at quarterback. Zeke Daniels is the presumed starter, but, he barely won the position last year and he didn't exactly seize it, with both hands. So, there's going to be a lot to be determined at that spot, which is obviously a very critically important position. And then at tailback, Brad Roberts might slip back there from fullback, or we might see somebody new because they return no experience at tailback. So there's a lot of positions that need to be filled, more so than individuals that we've really kind of had our eye on, other than Cormier at receiver, who has been a talked about talent since he was recruited. But finally, 5 years later, we're going to get to see him on the field.
If you had to say now what you expect from Air Force, strong as they were last year, middle of the road, or not quite the team we've seen in the past, where do you put them right now?
I'd put them stronger than they were last year, just because Zeke Daniels will have had that year of experience and the defense will be, a lot more talented. But in terms of years past, it's going to totally depend on the quarterback position. If they can find someone who can mimic what a Donald Hammond or some of their better quarterbacks of the recent years have done, then they can be a really good team, because I think this defense is going to carry them a long way. But the defense in this day and age of college football, points are going to be scored against you no matter how good your defense is. So if Air Force can find an offense to keep up with that, I think that's going to be the determining factor. And I think they have the talent on offense to do that. But again, until we see a quarterback out there really running the show, it's hard to say. But I could easily see this team winning 8 or 9 games.
Hey, let's turn to the schedule just for a minute. What's your take on the schedule, and what games jump out to you?
It's a schedule we saw coming. Air Force doesn't usually have a lot of surprises in its schedule because they really only have one game that is the wild card each year, because they have Army and Navy. They have 4 non-conference slots. Army and Navy take 2 of them. The FCS opener is always another one. So it's always that one spot. This year it's Florida Atlantic in a return trip, part of the home and home series. So that's an extremely winnable game, Florida Atlantic coming to Falcon Stadium. So if Air Force, if they can win the Commander-in-Chief's trophy, which obviously is certainly not a given, if they were to win 4 games in the non-conference, then suddenly you look at, how good they can be in the Mountain West. And the Mountain West is going to be a little bit down. There's been so much coaching turnover. There's always going to be the big games against Boise State, Colorado State, the Utah States, the division rivals. But, it's really nothing out of the ordinary for an Air Force schedule. There's going to be some difficult road trips, some teams that have a lot more firepower, especially from the west side of the conference in terms of what they do in the passing game and whatnot. But with Air Force, it usually comes down to how Air Force is doing more so than how the opponents are doing. Because when Air Force is at its best, even the games against Boise State, which this year is on the road, those games are always competitive when Air Force is at its best. So,
how big a deal is it that Air Force does not have a home game against either Navy or Army? They're going to play Navy on September 11th. It's the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. And then they'll play Army in Arlington, Texas on November 6th. How big a deal is it to the fans? How big a deal is it to the team not to have an Academy game at home?
It's going to be a huge deal for the alumni. They usually target that weekend for reunions and get-togethers, and that is the one game on the schedule where you can bank on Falcons Stadium being either full or close to full. There's going to be a traffic jam. Local restaurants are going to be filled that weekend. So to take that away is going to be a big deal for Colorado Springs, and again, the people who are closely tied to the Academy and who really like to come back and bask in that environment every year. But, this is just something that Athletic Director Nathan Pine wanted to do, and he's not the first athletic director from Air Force to try to take a game elsewhere and to, build awareness of Air Force in this region. So they're taking this one to Dallas, and, that's the cost as you lose the home game. So, of course, there's going to be people who are upset. There's going to be people who love it because they'll enjoy the chance to go to Dallas and enjoy a, not a road game. It's going to be a neutral site game, but it'll be Air Force hosting it this year.
Gotcha. All right, as we wrap this up, let's just fast forward to it's December. The season's kind of wrapping up. What's going to be the big storyline at the end of the season? What are you and I going to be talking about when we do this as we kind of review what happened in 2021?
I've been on the David Cormier bandwagon since he was a recruit in Albuquerque. And again, he came in, went to the prep school, didn't play as a freshman just because Air Force rarely plays freshmen. He was ineligible as a sophomore for a violation, and then he took a turn back as a junior. He has been one of the best talents I've seen for Air Force at receiver in practice. I think he's going to be one of those Jalen Robinette, Gerard Sanders type players who can just really change a game for Air Force on the edge. And I think people are going to be, a lot of eyes are going to be open when they see a 6'3", 220-pound athletic receiver for Air Force changing games. And I think we're going to talk about a renewed passing game for Air Force because of what he brings, and then what Patterson has at tight end and Brandon Lewis. I think there's a lot of weapons in the passing game. So people obviously assume Air Force just means running game. But I think this year is a year where if they have the quarterback that can do it, they can beat a lot of teams through the air. And I think that plus the defense is going to make this one of those teams that if they're having the kind of season, I think in December, people are going to be really excited about watching Air Force and what this brand of football looks like. So I think it's all going to start with David Cormier on the edge. And I think it's going to be an interesting year for Air Force to kind of diversify its offense.
Listen, Brent Brigham, I appreciate you being here to help preview the 2021 season of the Air Force Falcons. You can follow Brent's reporting at the Gazette in Colorado Springs, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with you at some point in the not too distant future. Thanks for joining us, Brent.
Happy to be here. Thank you.